we come to the last two presentations of today, which are related to the issue of benefit corporation and B Corp. But the first presentation will be by Matthieu Meneghini, Scientific Director of Green Media Lab and CEO of Impact Manager of Colonization. He's an environmental economist who has focused his career on developing impact synergies between man-made elements and natural ecosystems. So what does it mean to be a B Corp? And the presentation starts from the state of the art of the ecosystem and the impacts on human society, the role of corporations, and then describes the emergence of B Corps and benefit corporations, going into details as to how to measure the impact of one's own company and how a B Corp journey is structured. Well, good afternoon. First of all, many thanks to Lego. Today is a very important day for me because in this sector we're starting to speak about sustainability. Now, I would like to lead you to understand what it means to be a B Corp. That is a company which solves problems, creates added value, and does so by creating profits. So we're not speaking about not-for-profit companies. We're speaking about companies which solve problems. Well, I love this work. I like this job. So what does it mean to be a B Corp? So Andrea already introduced me, so I will not repeat what he said. Well, we have a big problem. We have a huge problem. This one is a chart of the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, BPM, parts per million. Now, for 800,000 years, when we can trace the concentration of CO2, we had 180 BPM. Now it's 409 BPM. Well, there was the third great extinction in the history where 97% of the life on Earth disappeared. Why so? Because CO2 got to 800 BPM. So it was a process of acidification. Life was not possible on our planet. Now, as you can see in this slide, there is a symptotic curve. And if you look at the time, here we use the time in 800,000 years. Well, this curve starts from 100 years ago. So we doubled CO2 in 100 years. If we continue in this way, we will have complete extinction of our species, but also of all other species. So we should really ask ourselves, are we really sure that we are the most intelligent species in this planet? So we speak a lot about climate changes, but nobody has really understood what that means. So we doubled CO2. We have climate changes. We increased temperature only by 1.2, and that led to desertifications. We no longer have snow in the mountains, and this will cause migration flows. We complain about tens of thousands of people who cross the Mediterranean Sea. Well, the prospect is millions and millions of people that will have to move from Africa. because where they live, it will no longer possible to live or grow something. It is unavoidable, inescapable, and this has a huge cost. It's 3,000 billions per year up to 2060. That means $3 trillion. What about our public debt? 2,400 billions. Well, think that every year the world economy will miss and lose $3,000 million. And this will lead to an upheaval, to a revolution in our habits. Companies will no longer be able to go on. So let's start to raise questions. So climate change is a very fashionable word, but nobody speaks about biodiversity loss, social problems. Well, I went to Los Angeles at Beverly Hills, beautiful places, and in front of those villas, there are thousands and thousands of people who have no home, homeless people. So social inequalities are increasing a lot. So imagine what will happen when the nations, when the populations will really clash in order to have access to resources. So what I'm telling you is not science fiction, it is reality, and it's taking place very fast. We have a very short historical prospect. This change is a change that in the next 15, 20 years will be inescapable and will completely change your life, the life of our children and our grandchildren. Now, we cannot wait for the governments to produce laws to regulate this. There is no time. I like a notion, a northern notion, where the company exists to resolve problems. A company exists within a social fabric in order to create value, generate value, and solve the problems of that society. So it is the task of companies to tackle those problems, because companies have the skills to do this transition, and companies and entrepreneurs can decide, can have a long-term vision. Now, what is the problem with politics? Well, if a decision is taken which is not particularly pleasant for one's own voters, in 2 or 3 years' time, those voters will no longer vote for you, while a company can make difficult choices, and only companies can make difficult choices. Well, B Corp means benefit corporation. B Corps are the core of environmental, social, and governance. But this wording is wrong, and I will tell you why. Because it's exactly the opposite. We speak about planting trees, but it's like putting a band on a wound. You have to avoid the wound. Now, governance, social, and environmental. This is the picture that I propose. Governance is the software which manages the behavior of your companies. A good software makes it possible to have a good corporate management, while a bad software condemns the company to failure. So the first thing that you have to do is to start from governance, and then the second thing that you have to do is to apply that governance. And then social. People are the hardware of a company. A company cannot exist without its people. People have to be involved and have to be convinced that this transition is necessary. And this makes the difference. Now, Do you know that there are companies where the staff do not like their job? Well, those companies have a big problem. Well, imagine companies where the staff are passionate, where the staff are ready to do everything in order to achieve a common objective. Well, that is a company which works well. And then environment. Well, well, environmental sustainability is nothing but efficiency, the efficiency of reducing waste. It's a question of material flows. The environment is the one which gives us the inputs. We transform those inputs, but we don't use them well. And the environment is a perfect balance. Now, the UN has realized that, well, many of you heard about SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. And they start from one point, that is the social aspect. And then they move to economic development, and then environment, because that is a consequence. But perhaps the most important SDG that we often forget is the number 17, which has to do with synergy, with cooperation between all the stakeholders. So this problem cannot be solved by just one country or one company. We have to collaborate. In Italy, legislation has made progress. We have the SDG paradigm, which has been interpreted by the legislation and also by a movement. The Italian legislation has created the benefit company, that is a company which is for profit, but which includes some impact objectives, which can be environmental or social in nature. And then the second company is the B Corp, that is a certification, a stamp, which is given after passing an audit by a third party. And both things go hand in hand. Now, let's start from the Benefit Corp. A Benefit Corp is a corporation, is a company which understands things and which introduces impact objectives. Let's make an example. Legor. You are going to become a benefit company, let's assume. And you work with raw materials, high-value raw materials, and your objective will be that of making the use of these raw materials more efficient and improve your supply chain, improve your ecosystem and all your stakeholders. So this is the first point. And the second point is the fact that you want your staff to be happy. You want your staff to live a dignified life. Well, I saw that because I was invited by people with whom I had already worked. And the first thing that I noted is that they smiled. And you know, a smile, the smile of people, is something which is fundamental, because you know that those people will not leave you. And remember that 51% of companies have a challenge that is finding staff and not losing them when they find them. So congratulations to Legor, because to see these two people smile, well, that is something very important. Now, what is a B Corp? Well, it is similar to a benefit company, but it is something more. A B Corp is a company which is ready to test itself, to be tested, to be analyzed, to be transparent with all the other companies. It is a company where you ask a third party, a B lab, to come over and to be tested and judged. And that judgment will be exhibited to everybody. So a B Corp is a certification, is a stamp, but what is beautiful in the B Corp is not so much the stamp. The beauty of B Corp is that it is a movement. When I meet colleagues, above all the colleague that will speak about this experience later, well, I can assure you that there is a common denominator in terms of values and intentions. And the B Corps help themselves mutually, so much so that the benefit company legally comes from a positive lobbying action made by the B Corps. So that means that there have been companies which have used their power, they put it together, and they did positive lobbying so that the law could be changed. So much is said about negative lobbying. For example, with climate changes, I invite you to go ExxonMobil in the internet, one of the most important oil companies in the world. In 1970, in a board meeting, they presented the expectations and the consequences of climate changes. What is frightening is that they really guessed it. They knew exactly. And there was a speech by the new CEO that shortly said, think if our shareholders would know that, what would they do? They would use other sources of energy and we would collapse. And what did they do? They spoke with other companies in their field and they did lobbying, a very effective lobbying activity, and the scientific community was not able to contrast that community of lobbyists who were very effective. So that is the power of lobbying, and the B Corp movement is the power of synergy. And then the B Corp movement realizes that we're all interdependent. Imagine a company which has suppliers, and one of its suppliers by chance fails, and the company doesn't know how to replace that supplier. So B Corps realize that their well-being, their success depends also on the others, because we are not isolated, we are not islands, we live in a society, we are connected, and that means that we have to think of ourselves, but also of the others. In Italy, we have a huge problem, which is the common goods situation. If something belongs to everybody, it belongs to nobody. So look at what happens in our country. And this is a big problem. Now, the companies can decide because they are responsible, and companies together can change things because they know that the one depends on the other. If something happens to a company, that will have repercussions also on other companies. But if a company is successful, that has a positive consequence also on other companies. So externality, it is called. Something which cannot be quantified economically, and it is something which is out of the economic standards. So we depend on the ecosystem, and then inclusion. Well, companies are interdependent, and so they do not underestimate the force and the strength of smaller companies. I myself have been helped by bigger companies. I was as lucky as to create a new company. And those who helped me, those who inspired me, is Patagonia, which is one of our customers, of our clients. And Patagonia spent money and time to help me find solutions. So the notion is that you do need to be paid sometimes, but you can help your colleagues in other companies, and that can bring you huge benefits. Well, also these figures have changed a lot. I will go fast also because we're a bit late. So the B Corp started is a movement which started in 2005, and in 2016, 2017 there was a big acceleration, and it's something that is running and running. It's a movement which has incredible figures. Well, in Italy, up to some months ago, there were just 120 B Corps. Now there are 200 B Corps. Look at the turnover. Now there are 6,000 B Corps in the world. So, do you remember that we said we spoke about synergy, inclusion, interdependence? Well, B Corps, if they have to choose someone with which to work, they will choose other B Corps. So think that there are other 6,000 B Corps. That means that there are 5,199 potential partners. Perhaps you're not in the same industry, but these companies have experience to share with you. Now, ESGs. In order to become a B Corp, you have to undergo an assessment, which is called B Impact Assessment. Well, I have an economic background, and I can tell you that what cannot be measured does not exist. That implies that in order to become a B Corp, you have to overcome a test, a very difficult one, which covers all the aspects of corporate life. There are 5 fundamental issues: governance, workers, community, and I'm referring to all the stakeholders from the state to the citizen, your suppliers, your customers, and then environment. You cannot be a B Corp if you don't have a holistic approach to business, because if one of these pillars is lacking, all the castle falls down. Well, now we speak a lot about outsourcing, charities, which is often used for marketing objectives. But the first thing to do is to work inside. You cannot do something without being that thing. So we spoke about governance, we spoke about a B Corp, which B Corp, a benefit corporate, have conduct codes. They are the software which implement your company. Now, 51% of companies do not find workers. But think about losing your own workers, because people are the things that are most worthy. So if you spend a lot of time to train a person and then you lose that, you miss that person, well, that's a huge problem. And perhaps you will recruit someone who doesn't have the same skills as the previous person. So you have to start from your people, from your staff. A person who is not motivated, who is not passionate, who is depressed, so much so that depression is the first disease in the world, above all in the Western world. So what do you think that a depressed person can do for your company? They will be inefficient. A depressed person will produce one-third of what they can produce. Well, think of a motivated person, a person who believes in what your company is doing. Well, that person will be ready to wake up at 4 in the morning to solve the problems of your company. That person is smiling, and smiling is contagious. It is something which creates synergy. So imagine that you involve your staff, and that staff is happy to work for you, and you will have more productivity, and that means more profits. So sustainability is something really tangible. Everybody thinks that it is a source of science fiction, but sustainability is real. It has to do with profits, and it starts from people. Now, how can you involve people? So first of all, you have to understand what is important for your community. You have to define that picture. You have to have values. And then in every community, there are leaders. There are people who are ready to fight. So you have to identify those people and give them the means so that they can really do something. And those people will involve their team, and the teams will help create a culture. So we always start from the culture. A company without a culture is an empty company. And then third issue, you have to devise a strategy, and you are the leader. You're not a boss, and there is a difference. If the strategy is developed together, so the leadership works with their champions, well, that strategy will be something that every person in your company will want to share. And only after that you can go out of your company and you can take your values, your way of doing things, and involve your stakeholders. So you should start from your suppliers. If your suppliers have a problem, well, that problem is also your problem. Help them improve. If they improve, they will be able perhaps to lower costs, and you will pay less, so more efficiency. And if there is a strong link between all the stakeholders throughout the supply chain, that supply chain becomes resilient, anti-fragile, Taleb would say. So something resilient is something which can be pushed without getting broken. But our world is fragile because it's a rigid world and because there is no such synergy between the various stakeholders. So some practical examples, I could speak for hours about that. So what can you do? The first is to devise policies and have a commitment. So the first phase is to have a commitment and take up responsibility and say, if those commitments are achieved, it is our merit. If they're not achieved, it is our fault. So taking up responsibility is fundamental. And then the second point is to create teams and delegate responsibility to your staff, because when you give power to those people, well, they will surprise you. They will create something unexpected, I can assure you.
Nella mia esperienza lavorativa
Well, in my working experience,
sono andato in burnout
I
e
had
ho
a
avuto la
problem of
fortuna di
burnout,
fare mia collega
and I was lucky
che
because there was a colleague, a
le
woman.
avevo dato fiducia.
I
Questa
had, I
persona qua
trusted her,
mi ha
and that
totalmente
person
aiutato, mi
helped
ha
me
aiutato a uscire
helped
da
me
una
get
immensa
out
difficoltà. Non ce l'avrei
of
mai
that
fatta senza di lei. Questa persona qua
difficult time.
adesso
And
è
that
a
person
capo
now
del
is
team che avevo
the
creato.
leader of the team that I
E
had
vi posso
created.
assicurare che le
And I
persone
can
non
assure you,
sottovalutate le persone.
well,
Le persone
we
hanno
should never
tantissimo da dare.
underestimate people.
Semplicemente che molto spesso non gli si
People
dà la
have a
possibilità
lot
di
to
farlo.
do, but simply sometimes we don't give them the
Non
possibility
comportatevi
to give
come
things.
una nave a
And
compartimenti
then
stagni.
do not
Bisogna creare dei team e
behave
bisogna che le varie funzioni aziendali
as an
parlino tra di loro.
isolated
Parlando tra di
item.
loro
The various units
capiscono le
should
varie
share
esigenze, le varie
things, should
differenze di punti di
speak
vista.
one with
La
the other. So
contaminazione tra i punti di vista
contamination between
porta
different
a nuove
viewpoints
idee, nuovi modi
leads
di
to
fare
new
e
ideas
porta allo scambio di
and
informazioni.
to
La mancanza
exchange
di
of
informazione è un
information.
pericolo
So the lack of
importantissimo
information
e
is
immenso
a
all'interno delle
risk, a
aziende.
huge
Quante
risk,
volte una persona magari alla
because
produzione
it
sa una
happens that
cosa
a
e la persona
person
in
in the
marketing non ne
production
ha idea?
unit is
Perché
aware
non
of
si
something and
parlano,
the person
perché
in the
non parlano
marketing unit is not
la
aware of
stessa
that
lingua.
thing,
E di chi è la
because they
colpa?
do not
La colpa è
speak
della
one of the
leadership,
other.
perché è il
And
leader che deve
it's the
mettere
fault of the
queste
leader.
persone insieme, deve
It's the leader
aiutarli
who should
a parlare tra
help
di
those
loro.
people share
Il
things.
leader è qualcuno che aiuta le persone,
So the
fa da
leader is
mediatore,
someone who
aiuta le persone a
works as a
parlare.
mediator and helps
Ultimo,
people speak one with the
prendete i
other.
vostri
And
stakeholder, la
finally,
vostra catena di
take
valore
your stakeholders, your
e
supply chain,
create dei progetti
and
con di loro.
create projects
Partite
with
dal
them.
piccolo, dei
Start
piccoli
from
obiettivi
small
e
objectives,
iniziate a farli. Da piccoli obiettivi si passerà a progetti un
and
pochino più
then you will
ambiziosi e
have
da un
more
progetto un pochino più
ambitious
ambiziosi si scoprirà che ci saranno dei grandi
objectives.
successi e anche si creano
And
sinergie, nuove joint
you will
venture, nuove
be able to
società.
create new joint
Non avete
ventures, new
idea
companies. You
per
have
oddio,
no
eh
idea.
sì,
Well,
ma
perhaps you
la
have.
potenza del
The
lavorare
power
insieme è
of
qualcosa di
working together
fenomenale
is
ed è
something
quello
incredible.
che ci definisce.
And that
Noi
is
umani
what defines us.
abbiamo plasmato il
We
mondo
human
perché
beings
abbiamo avuto la
have
capacità
forged
di
the
creare
world because
sovrastsistemi
we had
mentali,
the
perché
ability
siamo in
to
grado di
create
lavorare
mental
insieme.
super
E questa è la
systems
cosa che ci rende
helping us
veramente speciali rispetto agli
work
esseri umani.
together.
E l'ambiente.
And then the
Ultimo ma
environment.
non ultimo. Come vi ho detto, no, anzi non ve l'ho detto, noi siamo, il pianeta Terra è un sistema
Well,
matematico chiuso.
the Earth is a
funziona bene.
closed mathematical
L'unica cosa che
system.
entra oltre
The
a
only
quello che
thing
dico io,
that
che
enters
è l'energia solare.
is the
Quindi
solar energy.
tutto quello che noi facciamo
So whatever we do
deriva da
comes
beni primari che
from
noi prendiamo dalla
primary
Terra,
goods
i
that we
servizi
take
ecosistemici.
from the Earth.
E tutto quello che buttiamo
And whatever we throw
finisce sulla
away
nostra Terra.
ends up
La Terra,
in
il
our
pianeta,
Earth.
è un algoritmo
The
perfetto.
planet is a perfect
Ora, immaginate che
algorithm.
però
However,
andate a cambiare una variabile
imagine that
e
you
magari quella
change a
variabile è
variable,
un cubo.
and that variable is
L'impatto
a
è
cube.
esponenziale.
Well, there will be a huge
Quindi un'azienda di
impact.
produzione cosa può fare?
So what
Sono
can
quattro
a
passaggi
company
principali.
do? Well, there are four main phases: eco-design,
La terza è il
production,
consumatore, la quarta è
consumers,
recuperare
and then
e
recovery and
Questo
regeneration.
Lego lo fa benissimo.
And this is what Legor is doing very well.
Voi
Legor,
avete,
well,
sono rimasto molto stupito
I was very struck
da quello che fate, non me l'aspettavo.
by what you do.
Il 100% delle vostre risorse
100% of your
deriva da
resources
risorse che hanno già
come
stato
from
Non è una cosa
resources which had already been extracted. Think if all the other companies did the same.
Quindi Questo è uno strumento fondamentale.
So this is a fundamental
Il
instrument,
primo passaggio
and the
è
first
conosci te stesso, life
step
cycle assessment.
is
Quindi comprende
know yourself
tutti i passaggi
and
dell'impatto.
understand all the
Il life cycle
steps.
assessment
The
è
life
uno strumento
cycle assessment is a
potentissimo,
very
è uno
powerful
strumento che vi permette di
instrument
capire qual
which
è
enables
l'impatto
you to
aziendale e
understand
l'impatto di un
what is
prodotto dal
the
momento della
impact
propria
of your
estrazione fino
product
al momento
from
del
the
fine vita.
mining to the
E
end of
questo perché
life.
è così importante?
Why is this so
Sul
important?
tetto di Delfi c'è scritto Ioze
On
Salvon,
Delphi's
conosci te stesso.
monument,
Se tu conosci te
this
stesso,
wording
puoi
is
agire,
written,
puoi
know
cambiare le
yourself.
cose. Ma
Well,
se
if you
tu
know
non conosci te
yourself, you
stesso,
can
quindi
change
un'azienda, i tuoi
things.
processi, da
But
dove
if you
derivano le
don't
cose,
know
non puoi
yourself,
cambiare, non puoi
you
agire,
cannot
perché le cose
act,
che
you
andrai a
cannot
fare
change.
non saranno efficaci. Per cambiare,
In
bisogna
order to
conoscere se
change,
stessi,
you
ed
have
è per
to know
questo che Life Cycle
yourself. And
Assessment
that's
è
why
uno strumento
the
potentissimo. Life Cycle
LCA is a
Assessment vi
very
permette di
powerful
calcolare
instrument.
quanta acqua
It
utilizzate,
helps
quanta
you
CO2, quanto
calculate
metano
how much
utilizzato, quanta
water you
terra
use, how much
viene
methane you use,
utilizzata
how
per un
much earth you
per una
use
determinata unità di output,
for a
quanta
certain
biodiversità
output
viene impattata,
unit,
quanti chemicals usano
biodiversity,
della
chemicals,
farmaceutica e così via.
and so
Pensate quante
on.
informazioni.
Think of
Molto
how
più
much
complesso, non c'è solo
information
la CO2.
this can provide.
Quindi eco-design.
And then eco-design.
Un prodotto fatto bene, in
A
primis, è un prodotto che è stato pensato
product
bene.
which
Se un
is well
prodotto
produced is a
non
product
è
which has
stato
been
pensato
well
bene,
designed.
è un prodotto fallimentare.
Otherwise, it
Pensate
is a
alle grandi
failure.
aziende.
Think of big
Pensate a Apple,
companies.
perché
Think of
Apple
Apple.
vale più di 2
Apple
trillion?
is worth
Perché
more
Apple
than
sono i
two,
migliori a fare
three
design.
trillion
Non sono pochi
dollars
come cose.
because
Loro fanno design.
they
È
do
quello che importa. Loro
design
hanno
work.
pensato nel migliore dei
So
modi il proprio ecosistema.
they have their own
Quindi voi dovete
ecosystem.
definire
So you have to
quello che
define
volete,
what you want.
quindi lo scope, dovete utilizzare lo strumento del
You have to
self-assessment,
use the
perché in questo modo
LCA instrument
avrete
because
un'idea
in
reale
that
di
way
impatto,
you
di
will
quelli che sono gli
have
impatti,
an
e
idea of
poi
your impact.
dovrete
And then
andare a fare il design del prodotto,
you have
ma
to
prima
design
ancora
the
il design
product,
dei processi.
but before
Voi
that
dovete
you have to
comprendere
design
perfettamente tutti i
processes.
processi
You
e i
have to
flussi materiali
understand all the
per
processes
andare a
and all
disegnare
the
bene
material
qualcosa.
flows.
E in ultimus,
And
per raggiungere
finally,
questo, dovete
you
coinvolgere
have to
la vostra
involve
catena di
your
fornitura,
supply
perché da
chain
soli voi non potete farcela.
because you cannot do it
Dovete
alone. You
coinvolgerli,
have to
siete
involve
separato.
your supply chain.
La seconda parte è la produzione.
And then production.
Ma qua penso che lascerò poi la parola
Well,
all'ospite successivo che
it will be the next
può darvi
speaker
un'idea
who
molto
will
precisa di quello che
give
fanno, ma
you
la
a very
produzione parte
accurate
dalla
idea.
produzione. Voi, scusate, una cosa importante da
Well,
capire.
one point.
Solitamente l'impatto
Normally,
di
the
un'azienda sul
impact
proprio
of a
prodotto è
company
del
on its
10-15%
product
massimo.
is
Il
10-20%.
restante 80% di quel
The
prodotto
remaining 80% of that
deriva dalla
product
propria catena di
comes
valore.
from
Quindi deriva
their own
dalla proprio
value
da
chain,
dove si prendono le materie prime,
from where you
da
take
chi
the raw
produce i
materials.
semilavorati,
Those
da
who
come
produce
si
semi-finished
montano i
products, how
semilavorati,
you
perché ovviamente se io ho
use
pensato bene
semi-finished
un
products.
prodotto vuol dire che l'ho anche assemblato bene.
So
Quel prodotto verrà
that
utilizzato
product
bene,
should
ma
be
se poi
well assembled,
a fine
but
vita
at the
quel
end of
prodotto sia stato
life,
pensato bene
if
ed è
that
stato
product,
assemblato
if it
bene,
has
potrà
been
essere
well
anche
assembled,
disassemblato bene
can
e
also
potrà
be well
tutti
disassembled,
i componenti
and all the
potranno
components
rientrare nel circolo
can
economico
go
e questo
back
andrà a far
to the
risparmiare una marea di
economic
soldi,
circle,
nonché di impatto
and that
ambientale.
will save a lot of money and a lot of environment.
Comunicazione e consumo.
And then communication
Il
and
consumatore, se tutto
consumption.
questo è bellissimo, ma
Well,
se
all
non
that is
coinvolgete
fine,
i nostri
but if
consumatori,
you
i vostri
don't
consumatori,
involve
è
your
tutto
consumers,
totalmente inutile.
it's useless.
E per far questo
And to do that,
non è il consumatore con delle semplici campagne
well,
di marketing.
marketing
Tutto
campaigns are
parte
not
da chi
enough.
vi rappresenta, dalla vostra forza
Everything
vendite.
starts
La
from
vostra
your
forza
sales
vendite deve
forces
capire perché è
that
importante,
have to
deve essere
understand
completamente
why it
coinvolta.
is
La vostra
important.
forza
They have to be
vendite un
involved.
giorno dovrà trasmettere queste informazioni al
They will
consumatore,
have to
perché la vostra
share
forza
this
vendite è il
information with
vostro
the
touch point
consumers.
con il cliente, il
So sales
momento
forces
in cui
are
il
your
cliente
touch point,
veramente può essere
the moment
influenzato.
when customers can be influenced. Yesterday, I was speaking with some colleagues,
quanto mi mancava il negozietto di quartiere.
and I said that I really miss the local community shop. Why so?
Andavo là
Because when I went to
e
those small
avevo
shops,
esigenza,
I
c'era una
had
persona
a
che
need,
adorava quel lavoro,
and there
adorava
was
il
a
proprio
person who
prodotto e sapeva
loved their
esattamente che
job,
cosa
and
darmi.
they
Adesso
perfectly
invece
knew what to give
vado
me.
su Amazon
Now
o
I
vado
go
al centro
to
commerciale e compro
Amazon or I
qualcosa, ma è
go to a
veramente
big
la cosa
shop
che mi
and I
serve
buy
di più? No.
something. Is that
Questo
really
per
the thing
dire
that I
quanto è
need? No.
importante che la
That is
vostra
to
forza
tell you
vendite venga
how
coinvolta e
important it
trasmetta
is to involve your
quello
sales
che è
forces
necessario al
so that they
consumatore, perché il
share
consumatore è
with
altrettanto
consumers, because
responsabile, è
consumers
corresponsabile
are
con voi. E il
responsible
consumatore, nel momento in cui smette di
and
utilizzare quel bene, magari me lo può riportare
consumers,
indietro,
perhaps when
può
they
avere un
stop
benefit da
using
ciò.
a certain
E voi, se
product,
avete fatto un
can
buon
bring
lavoro
it
di
back to
ecodesign,
you.
potete
And if
riprendere
you did a
il
good
bene
job
che
with
vi
the
ha riportato il
design, you
consumatore,
can
magari
take
regalargli indietro
the
qualcosa
product
e risparmiare un sacco
and
di
save
soldi
a lot of money
sull'approvvigionamento.
in terms of supplies.
Ultimo, recupero. Bisogna recuperare le
And then
cose, appunto.
recovery, you
Se il
have to recover
consumatore non è
things.
consapevole, sia una dispersione enorme. Immaginate se
Imagine
nelle aziende IT
if in
i
the
computer non
IT
venissero
companies,
riportati direttamente al
computers
produttore,
were brought
al posto
back
di essere
directly to
mandati nelle
producers
discariche RAI. E
instead
magari il
of being
produttore è già
sent
specializzato e
to
connettato e
landfills.
conosce perfettamente il proprio
And the
prodotto
producer
nel disassemblaggio.
can
Quanto si
disassemble
va a
the computer.
risparmiare?
So think
Si
of how
scompone,
much you could
si
save.
rigenera
You
e si
disassemble, you
ricrea.
regenerate, and you
Questa è
recreate.
economia circolare. L'economia
This is a
circolare vuol
circular
dire
economy,
efficienza
which
da tutti
means
i punti di vista.
efficiency
L'economia
from all
circolare è un
viewpoints.
modo di intendere il
Circular
consumo. L'economia
economy
circolare,
is a
però prima
way
ancora,
to
è un modo di lavorare,
see
è un modo di pensare.
consumption. It is a
E la
way of
responsabilità da
working.
imprenditori,
And as
la nostra responsabilità
entrepreneurs,
è
we
coinvolgere le
have a
persone all'interno della
responsibility.
propria
We need to
azienda
involve
e far
people
sì che lo capiscano e che
so
ci
that
tengano
people will
e danno la
understand this issue
possibilità di
and
provarci,
give them the possibility
di
of trying,
sperimentare,
of
di cambiare il business as
experimenting,
usual.
of
Questo
changing
perché se non si
the
sperimenta, se
situation.
non si
Because if you
prova,
don't
se non si
try,
fanno azzardi, fra 10 anni
in 10 years'
ci
time,
sarà qualcun altro che l'avrà fatto e si sarà
someone
preso
else
la tua
will
share di
do that
mercato.
and will take
Per
your market
essere
share.
leader nel mercato vuol dire anche prendersi
So
dei
to be
rischi
leaders in the
enormi. E
market
in
also
questo
means to take
caso
up risks.
l'economia
And
circolare
in
non
this
è solo
case,
una questione di
circular
leadership, è una
economy is
questione di
not only a
responsabilità.
question of
Io
leadership, it is a question
personalmente
of responsibility.
mi ricordo perfettamente,
Well, I perfectly
ero andato
remember
nel Mar Rosso, mi
I
ricordo
was
una
on
balena con la
the
via,
Red Sea,
sono ritornato 10 anni dopo,
and then I went back
c'era
10
un
years
quadro, un
after,
pesce,
and there was just one
e i
coral
miei
and
figli quando
2
li avrò
fish.
non vedranno neanche questo.
And
Non dico che ce la faremo,
I'm not saying
però
that
è
we will
criminale
make
non
it,
provarci
but
e
it
mettere
is
la testa sotto la sabbia
really
con le istituzioni.
criminal not to
Quindi
try it.
secondo me essere B Corp
So
è
to be a
semplicemente
B
prendersi la
Corp is
responsabilità,
to take up
lavorare
responsibility,
insieme
to work together
e provarci.
and try.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Ringraziamo Matthieu Meneghini per la coinvolgente presentazione e ci prepariamo a chiudere.
Thank you very much, Matthieu Meneghini.